Over the course of our SR86 build episodes, we've received a huge number of questions, and we tend to see some of the same questions crop up over and over again. So instead of me replying with the same reply time and time again in the comments section, we're going to address some of those more common questions here so that everyone's got a better understanding of why we're doing some of the things we're doing and the thought processes behind it. So let's get stuck in. All right, our first question comes from Dirty Doug Imp, and he has asked, would you ever put a Honda K-Series in an 8.6? Now, we've been asked this exact question in a few different forms, probably, I don't know, about 10,000 times. So it's a good one to get started with. Usually that question goes, should I put a K20 in it? Should I put a K24 in it? Put a K-Series in it, you'd never have any problems, and so it goes on. So let's dive into that. First of all, really important for me to state here at the start that I have nothing against the Honda K-Series engine. In fact, in my opinion, the K20, probably one of the best naturally aspirated 4 cylinders ever made. Cylinder head flow is exceptional. Between the VTEC system that switches between high and low cam lobes, and also the continuously variable intake cam with Honda's iVTEC, it is an exceptional engine that provides great power as well as a really wide power band. So why didn't we go that route? Simply put, we didn't have one. Now, I know that not everyone has watched every episode, and we did explain this right back at the start. So let me just reiterate, because we do get this question every single time we release a new episode. At the start, we had about a 4.5 week time frame when we realized that our Stroker 3U ZFE was not going to be ready. That gave us 4.5 weeks to do a full engine swap on the car and get it ready for the first round of racing. Now, even as it was, as you've found out probably watching these episodes, that didn't actually quite go to plan. But what we did have in the workshop was a built SR20VE turbocharged engine that we'd built for our 350Z. That was sitting there gathering dust, ready to go. There is no way that we would have had the time available to, first of all, source a Honda K20, then build it to suit a turbocharged application, physically mount it in the engine bay, adapt our TTI 6-speed sequential gearbox to it, wire it, plumb it, etc. There is no way we had enough time available. So that is the main reason why we didn't go down that path. However, a lot of people have also in the same vein asked us why on earth we chose the SR20 engine. Basically, a fair few people kind of claiming that the SR20 is old technology and, to paraphrase, dog shit. Well, in one way, fair enough. If we're talking about the SR20 DET that we'd conventionally find in an S chassis car, I personally have tuned hundreds of those over the years, and I also don't really have a lot of love for them. They don't tend to make exceptional power for the sum of the parts. They have a problematic cylinder head that doesn't flow well, and also the rocker assembly doesn't really like high RPM. So in my opinion, probably not the best choice, and I really do apologize to those SR20 lovers out there. However, when we switched to the P11 or P12 Primera VVL cylinder head, this is a game changer, and it's really almost difficult to compare a VE cylinder head to the earlier SR20 DET. So what's different with this head? Well, first of all, the port flow is so much better than a DET head. So all other things being equal, it's simply got the potential to make more power. The game changer though really is in the valve train actuation. First of all, the VVL cylinder head fixes the main problem with the DET rocker assembly, where the rocker assembly was prone to making its way out of the cylinder head and causing all sorts of expensive damage. The rockers in the VVL cylinder head are shaft mounted. They cannot get away. This is why these heads, particularly in drag applications, continuously, or regularly I should say, rev to 10, 10.5, even 11,000 RPM with reliability. The other aspect with the head which is useful for us is that it actually has Nissan's take on Honda's VTEC mechanism. So it has 3 cam lobes per cylinder, it has 2 smaller lobes that are optimized for low RPM performance and a larger lobe that's optimized for high RPM performance, and it's switched via the ECU via oil pressure. So Honda's VTEC system in Nissan's form. So the idea behind this is that it gives us the best of both worlds, and particularly with a turbocharged application, multiplication gives us a wider power band. And that's exactly what we saw. We've got a power band that starts at 4,500 RPM where we reach full boost, and we're actually making full power up at 8,900 RPM. So it does exactly what we had hoped for there. On this basis, I can't do a direct comparison between the VVL cylinder head and the K20. Just with my own experience on the dyno, it's probably a pretty close second to the K20 engine. So not a bad option for us. For the Honda lovers out there though, you'll be pleased to know that we are actually going to be building a turbocharged K24 for an upcoming circuit racing project. It's a little way off, probably not going to see much of that for the next 12 to 18 months, but it is going to be there. Now the other question in the same vein that we got here is why don't we go with the K24? Because of course capacity is king. Fair enough. Now there is again a reason behind our decisions here. Obviously the primary one I've just gone over. We didn't have time to source a K24 and build that, just the same as we didn't have time to build a K20. But the K24 for this particular car would have been problematic. We run in different classes in the Endurance Racing Championship here, and the class we run in is called Class B. It runs up to 3.5 litres of engine capacity. Now, we're only running a 2 litre, but with turbocharged engines there is a 1.7 times multiplication factor. What this means is, if you don't want to drag out your calculator, 2 litre times 1.7 brings us near to the top of that 3.5 litre capacity class. If we go 2.4, that's going to bump us up into the top class where we would realistically be needing somewhere around 650 to 700 wheel horsepower to be class competitive. Now with a 2.4 K20 for example, there's no real problem with making that sort of power. However, the issue is that to get the power to the ground we would have needed wider wheels and tyres. This would have required a wide body kit, basically re-engineering the entire car, and we just didn't want to do that with this particular 86. So the next project we will be working on, we will be looking at running in that unlimited class, that top capacity class. We will be engineering a chassis with wider wheels and tyres that can make use of the power that the K24 can produce, so you can stay tuned for that. Another question again, sort of along the same lines that I've seen pop up numerous times is, should have gone K-Series, you'd have had no reliability problems. I'm sorry, but that is unrealistic. Yep, the K-Series engine is a great engine, it's been well proven. However, I've been in motorsport for long enough to know that if you've got an engine in a car, it's got the potential for reliability issues. We'd probably have had different reliability issues to work through than what we've seen with the SR20VE, but I can guarantee we would have had some issues that cropped up that we'd have needed to work through. Our next question comes from Brandon Taylor, and Brandon's asked, what are your biggest concerns moving forward with reliability for endurance racing regarding this setup? How do you prioritize what needs the most attention when setting up this vehicle for these races? Okay, Brandon, that's actually proven to be a pretty big question, and we've obviously seen our fair share of hurdles to jump over with this particular build, which is why we took stock and decided to slow down the development and sort everything out. So let's talk about the reliability issues. So obviously we've had problems with the cooling system, and we've had problems most recently with a shim in the cylinder head. So the direction we're going to address these. First of all, moving to the smaller cams, which we talked about in a previous episode. So moving to the P12 cams should move our power band lower in the RPM range. So the aim here is to reduce the maximum RPM that we're running to. We never really envisaged running this engine to 9,000 plus RPM. It was just a case of when we got on the dyno, that's where it wanted to make power. So moving it to a point where our maximum RPM is around 8,000. Hopefully with the P12 cams, this should also aid our low RPM boost response, so bring the turbo on boost a little bit earlier. I think all things considered, the lower we can keep the RPM limit, it's sensible. That's going to put less stress and strain on the engine. So that's our number one priority. The shim, that honestly is a really simple thing though. Don't use an ignition cut and you're not going to have that problem. So basically this, as I explained in a previous episode, was a hangover from the rev limiter setup on our 1UZFE, which used a bucket and shim valve actuation instead of a rocker arm. So getting rid of that, going back to fuel cut, that's going to eliminate the problem of the shims getting out. It should not be an issue for us. Then we've got our cooling system, and this is really where we still need to do some testing. Obviously, we moved from the mechanical water pump to the electric water pump. That proved to be a really good thing. However, even in the testing that we did, it looked like while we were on top of control of our water temperature, our engine coolant temperature, if I had to place a bet, I think at this stage we probably needed to still do a little bit more work around our oil temperature. Our oil temperature moves a lot slower than our engine coolant temperature, but over the course of a track session we were seeing a general trend where the oil temperature was still starting to climb, hadn't really plateaued, which is what we need to see, and that's something we just need more testing. At the point we did test the car though, we still didn't have a finalized cooling package, and particularly the exit from the oil cooler as well as the transmission cooler, that wasn't optimized, and it was sort of exiting straight towards what was left of the front bar. So a bit of work to do there, and this is something we really want to test before we actually end up going to our next endurance race event. Our next question comes from Killsteel Devon, and this is another really common question. Other than cost or availability, is there any reason you didn't go with an EFR or G-Series Garrett turbocharger? And basically this question's cropped up continuously, and you can insert your favorite brand of turbocharger in here. And again, we have a little bit of method to our madness here. And it might seem that in today's age that choosing an older Garrett GTX 3076 Gen 2 turbo might not be that sensible. There are clearly superior turbos available from Borg-Warner with their EFR series, as well as Garrett's new G series with the G25 660, even maybe the G30. So here's what we were thinking with this choice. Now remembering again, this particular engine was built for our 350Z. It was built about 18 months ago, and the project kind of got put on hold just due to the workload we had around the shop here. The original intention, we were working in conjunction with Garrett, and what we wanted to do was get some solid data on the differences between the older GTX turbos and the new G series. So at the time we put that turbocharger on the engine, the G30 turbocharger hadn't actually been released, and the intention was to do some back-to-back testing. Now that's something we still want to do. While the G-Series turbochargers have been around now for quite a while, we've seen precious little in the way of really solid back-to-back data. The reason for this is most times when people change turbochargers, they've probably changed 4 or 5 other things at the same time. So it's really hard to get a gauge on exactly what of the difference we see on the dyno sheet was attributed to just the turbo change compared to maybe a cam change, intake change, intercooler, you name it, all of the other changes that go hand in hand with our build. So that's what we wanted to do. That's why the engine is so heavily instrumented as well in terms of exhaust manifold back pressure as well as turbocharger speed. We've also got inlet and outlet pressure on the compressor and inlet and outlet temperature on the compressor, along with EGT as well. So this allows us to really validate exactly what the turbocharger is doing. That is also still something that's totally on the cards, but clearly we've had our hands full just getting the engine up and running, so that'll be something for the off season. Our next question comes from a couple of episodes back, and we had a couple of questions along the same vein. This one comes from Brett Walker, and to give you some context around this, this was after we put the engine back together with some slight modifications, the electric water pump, a new cylinder head that had some slight modifications to the combustion chamber. We also went to the Supertech aftermarket valve springs, and we ended up moving to exactly the same Garrett GTX 3076R Gen 2 turbo, but we moved from a 1.01 exhaust housing down to a 0.83. And when we hit the dyno, we pleasantly found that we were up around about 40 to 45 wheel horsepower at exactly the same boost. Not something that we were unhappy about. However, given the changes made, the increase in power seemed a little disproportionate to the sum of the parts changes. And we sort of had a bit of a tongue-in-cheek title for this, like, why are we making more power? Now, the reality is we've got a pretty good idea of where the power improvement came from, but we had a couple of people basically cite that the smaller exhaust housing is the likely source of that additional 45 wheel horsepower. Brett Walker's question here is, at higher boost, or statement really, at higher boost levels or high mass flow, you probably will reduce max power with the smaller exhaust housing, but since you're not at max capacity of the turbo, the smaller exhaust housing is moved to a combined compressor turbo to a higher efficiency, thus more power for that much mass airflow. Now, the chances of this being the total result or total reason for our 45 wheel horsepower gain are unfortunately probably a little bit unlikely, and it really comes down to how the turbocharger system works. So for a given amount of power, essentially we need a specific mass flow from our turbocharger. We also know that we were comparing the two turbochargers at exactly the same pressure ratio, and in order to achieve that pressure ratio at a given mass flow, we need a specific turbo speed. What I'm saying here is that essentially our operating specifics for our turbocharger in terms of compressor flow and speed, or speed specifically, are going to be identical because our pressure ratio has remained the same. On the other hand though, we now need to get the mass flow through the engine. So the air goes into the engine, it's mixed with fuel, it's combusted, and then it needs to make its way out the exhaust system. The problem here is that the smaller exhaust housing, what that does is it creates more exhaust back pressure. This is a good thing in one way because it provides more drive energy to the turbocharger. So this is why when we move from a large AR housing to a smaller one, we tend to pick up low RPM performance. It reduces the boost threshold. The turbocharger comes on boost at lower RPM. This is one of the things we wanted to achieve. It did exactly that. We brought the turbocharger in around 300 RPM earlier. All other things being equal though, at the same pressure ratio, we can rightly expect the exhaust back pressure is going to be higher. Now, when that exhaust back pressure increases, it's essentially choking the flow through the engine. Basically, it makes it harder for the engine to expel the burnt combustion gases out into the exhaust system. And if our exhaust back pressure becomes too high, we get into a situation where the spent exhaust gases can actually go back into the cylinder and basically dilute the fresh intake charge. So moving to a smaller housing almost certainly is going to be not an explanation for a 45 wheel horsepower gain. Granted, at lower boost pressure, the exhaust back pressure probably isn't going to be skyrocketing. And as Brett has rightly stated, once we start pushing this particular combination harder, it's likely that the high RPM, high boost power will start to drop away compared to what we would have seen on the 1.01. But claiming that as the reason for our power gain is probably also a little bit optimistic. When we're looking at this, what we want to look at is the sum of the parts change. So we've got a change to the exhaust housing AR, all other things being equal, the turbocharger, it's identical. So we know that that smaller housing should, in theory, create more exhaust back pressure, hurting our high RPM performance, but bring the turbocharger on earlier. It certainly brought the turbocharger on earlier. That shouldn't aid our power though. At high RPM it should hinder. So let's look at the other things that I mentioned. We've had some light modifications done to the combustion chamber shape. That should aid mixture formation. We've also moved to a different piston that's raised the compression ratio marginally. Again, on E85, that should be an improvement in our efficiency and our engine power. We've also moved to an aftermarket valve on the inlet and the exhaust. These aftermarket valves should improve our flow, our airflow in and out of the cylinder head. There's also been a little bit more time put into the valve seat geometry, and again, getting the valve seat geometry correct can aid flow. So when we are looking at, on one hand, all of these things, I should also mention the electric water pump, which will give us a small but measurable gain in power. So we're looking at all of these things on one hand, which are proven to improve our performance. And we've got this other option here, the exhaust housing, which the physics simply says is going to reduce our power. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, then probably it's a duck. So I'm going to go with the things that should have improved power being the reason why we picked up that 45 wheel horsepower.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.